Somewhere beneath the surface of the South China Sea, a submarine is moving. It makes almost no sound. Its hull is wrapped in tiles designed to swallow sonar pulses whole. Its sail, the tall fin that rises from the top of the vessel, isn't shaped like any submarine sail you've seen before. It's angled, sloped, almost sculpted, as if someone designed it not to cut through water, but to deflect something far more dangerous: the sound waves that hunters use to find it. This is the Type 039C, China's newest conventional attack submarine, and it may have just rendered decades of American undersea surveillance strategy dangerously obsolete. That's not speculation. That's the quiet assessment rippling through defense circles right now. Because here's the thing. For the better part of 60 years, the United States and its allies have relied on a specific method to track hostile submarines in the Pacific. Listen, just listen. Drop hydrophones on the ocean floor, string them across hundreds of miles of seabed, and wait for enemy boats to make noise. It worked brilliantly during the Cold War against Soviet submarines that rumbled through the deep like freight trains. It still works reasonably well against older Chinese boats. But the Type 039C wasn't built to be heard. It was built to be invisible. Not just to the ear, but to the ping. And that distinction changes everything. To understand why this submarine has so many analysts worried, you need to appreciate what makes it different from its predecessors. China has been building Yuan-class submarines for years, and each iteration has been quieter than the last. But the 039C doesn't just focus on reducing the noise it emits. It was engineered from the keel up to defeat active sonar, the kind of detection where you send out a pulse of sound and listen for the echo bouncing off a target. That angled sail isn't decorative. It features a chine running along the upper section, creating sloped surfaces that scatter incoming sonar energy away from the source rather than reflecting it back. Think of it like a stealth fighter's angular body, except underwater. When an adversary pings, instead of getting a clear return signal, they get something faint, distorted, or nothing at all. And it doesn't stop at the sail. The entire hull is covered in anechoic tiles, specialized rubber-like coatings that absorb sound energy rather than bouncing it back. The junction between the sail and the hull uses an oversized rounded fillet structure that smooths out the transition, cutting down both hydrodynamic drag and the acoustic reflections that would normally betray a submarine's presence. The result is a vessel with an extraordinarily low sonar cross-section. Underneath the water, it might as well be a ghost. Then there's the propulsion. The Type 039C runs on an air-independent power system, a Stirling engine setup that allows the boat to stay submerged for weeks without needing to surface or snorkel for air. Diesel-electric submarines have always had this vulnerability. Eventually, they have to come up to run their diesel engines and recharge their batteries, and that's when they're most exposed. AIP eliminates that window. The 039C can creep through contested waters at low speed, drawing minimal power, producing almost no detectable signature for extended stretches. It also carries a towed array sonar and an extended aft casing, which means this isn't just a platform trying to avoid detection, it's actively hunting too. It's an anti-submarine submarine. Now here's where the strategic picture gets genuinely alarming. The Pacific Ocean is enormous, but geography imposes constraints on how Chinese submarines can reach open water. The People's Liberation Army Navy operates primarily from bases along China's eastern and southern coasts. And to get from the relatively enclosed waters of the East and South China Seas into the vast blue of the Pacific, their submarines have to pass through a series of narrow straits, choke points carved between island chains. The most critical of these are the Bashi Channel, which separates Taiwan from the Philippines to the south, the Luzon Strait, a wider passage between Taiwan and the northern Philippines, and the Miyako Strait, which sits west of Taiwan as part of the first island chain. Every Chinese submarine heading for the open Pacific has to thread one of these needles. For decades, the United States and Japan have exploited this geographic reality with a system known informally as the fishhook. It's a network of seafloor-mounted hydrophone arrays, an evolution of the Cold War-era SOSUS network, stretching from Japanese waters down through the Taiwan area and into the Philippines. The concept is elegant in its simplicity. You wire the ocean floor with listening devices, and when a submarine passes through, you hear it. The fishhook has been the backbone of American undersea awareness in the Western Pacific. It's one of the reasons U.S. commanders have historically felt confident they could track Chinese submarine movements in and out of the first island chain. But those arrays were designed for a different era. Deep-sea SOSUS nodes look out horizontally across ocean basins, and their effectiveness depends on the target actually making noise. Against a submarine like the Type 039C, one that barely whispers and is specifically shaped to defeat the active sonar that might otherwise compensate for its silence, the fishhook starts to develop holes. The Bashi Channel and Luzon Strait are particularly problematic. These are acoustically complex environments with internal ocean waves, thermoclines, and variable salinity layers that bend and scatter sound in unpredictable ways. A quiet, AIP-powered submarine transiting at slow speed through one of these corridors during the right oceanographic conditions could potentially slip through without triggering a single sensor. That's not a theoretical concern. It's an operational nightmare. Because once a Chinese submarine reaches the open Pacific undetected, the search area explodes from a narrow strait into millions of square miles of deep ocean. Finding it at that point becomes exponentially harder. And every day it remains unlocated, the strategic calculus shifts. Carrier strike groups have to assume there's a threat beneath them. Supply lines become contested. The entire American forward deployment posture in the Western Pacific starts to erode, not because of a dramatic battle, but because of uncertainty. The submarine doesn't have to fire a torpedo to have an effect. It just has to disappear. So what's the answer? The U.S. Navy and its allies are being forced into a fundamental rethinking of how they hunt submarines. And the emerging strategy revolves around one core idea. You can no longer just listen. You have to illuminate. The most powerful tool in this new approach is something called SIRTAS LFA, the Surveillance Towed Array Sensor System, Low-Frequency Active Sonar. When a submarine is too quiet to be detected passively, LFA flips the script. Instead of waiting for sound, it creates it. A set of 18 acoustic projectors is suspended beneath a dedicated surface ship and emits controlled pulses of low-frequency sound, typically between 100 and 500 hertz, at a source level of roughly 215 underwater decibels at 1 meter. When you combine the array's output coherently, the effective source level climbs to between 230 and 240 decibels. That's enough acoustic energy to travel vast distances through the deep sound channel and bounce off anything solid in its path, including a submarine hull covered in anechoic tiles. The return echo is picked up by the ship's towed passive array, and suddenly, that ghost has a location. But LFA isn't a silver bullet. For one thing, it's loud, by design. And that creates two problems. The first is tactical. Emitting active sonar announces your presence. The general rule of thumb in undersea warfare is that a target can hear the searcher at roughly twice the distance at which the searcher can detect the target. You're revealing yourself every time you ping. The second problem is environmental. Low-frequency sound travels enormous distances underwater, and marine mammals, whales, dolphins, species that depend on sound for communication, navigation, and feeding, can be affected. The Navy operates under strict environmental regulations that prohibit LFA transmissions at received levels above 180 decibels within 22 kilometers of any coastline and within designated offshore biologically important areas. That means in the very choke points where you most want to use active sonar, narrow coastal straits close to land, you may be legally and ethically constrained from doing so at full power. This is precisely why the next layer of technology matters so much. The P-8A Poseidon, the Navy's primary maritime patrol aircraft, carries a system called MAC, Multi-Static Active Coherent Sonobuoys. The MAC system uses two complementary components: the AN-SSQ-125, a sonobuoy that acts as a coherent acoustic source, and the AN-SSQ-101, a receiver. The aircraft drops patterns of these buoys across a search area, and unlike older sonobuoy systems, the 125 can emit multiple pings with optimized waveforms and adjustable pulse durations. This makes it far more effective in the kinds of shallow water, high clutter environments you find in and around Pacific choke points. The beauty of MAC is flexibility. A P-8A can be on station within hours of a queue, lay down a sonobuoy field tailored to the specific acoustic conditions, and actively search a corridor without putting a manned ship at risk. It's faster and more adaptable than towing an LFA array into position, and it works in the coastal zones where LFA is restricted. But even MAC has its limits. Sonobuoys have finite battery lives. Aircraft have limited loiter times. You can't keep a P-8A orbiting over the Bashi Channel around the clock 7 days a week. Which brings us to what many consider the most important piece of this evolving puzzle: unmanned systems. DARPA has been quietly developing a program called DASH, Distributed Agile Submarine Hunting. And it's built around two complementary technologies. The first is TRAPS, the Transformational Reliable Acoustic Path System. These are fixed passive sonar nodes designed to sit on the deep ocean floor and exploit reliable acoustic paths, specific depth channels where sound travels extraordinarily well, to detect submarines at long range. Think of TRAPS as a next-generation, more covert, more targeted evolution of SOSUS. You plant them in the Bashi Channel, the Luzon Strait, the Miyako Strait, and they sit there silently listening, waiting for a contact. The moment TRAPS picks up something, it cues the second component, SHARK, the Submarine Hold-at-Risk Vehicle. SHARK is an unmanned underwater vehicle equipped with active sonar. It's mobile, it's expendable relative to a manned submarine, and its entire purpose is to sprint toward the contact that TRAPS detected and actively track it. The concept is sometimes described as a leech. Once SHARK latches onto a target's trail, it holds that submarine at risk, maintaining a track that can be fed back to manned platforms for tactical decisions. The genius of this pairing is that it separates the sensor from the shooter and, crucially, separates the active sonar emitter from any manned crew. You're no longer asking a billion-dollar attack submarine to give away its position by pinging. You're sending a drone to do it. And then there's the Orca. Boeing's extra-large unmanned undersea vehicle is something else entirely. A massive autonomous submarine drone capable of carrying a range of modular payloads. The Navy's second Orca was scheduled for delivery in early 2025, and these platforms represent a leap toward persistent, forward-deployed unmanned presence in contested waters. An Orca can be pre-positioned in a choke point, loiter for extended periods, and carry whatever the mission demands: sensing equipment, mine warfare payloads, communication relays. It's the kind of asset that turns a narrow strait from a gap in coverage into a permanently monitored zone without risking a single sailor. If you're finding this breakdown valuable, consider subscribing so you don't miss future deep dives into how the balance of military power is actually shifting beneath the surface, sometimes literally. There's a lot more to unpack here, and the details matter. Now, none of this technology exists in a vacuum. The Pacific is too vast, and the threat is too distributed for the United States to monitor alone. This is where alliance coordination becomes not just helpful, but essential. Japan has long maintained its own sophisticated undersea sensor networks, and these are deeply intertwined with the fishhook architecture. But the network is expanding beyond the Western Pacific. Japan is actively assisting India in constructing an undersea surveillance barrier, a chain of seabed-based sensors stretching from the northern tip of Sumatra down to Indira Point, India's southernmost territory in the Andaman Sea. This so-called undersea wall in the eastern Indian Ocean is designed to monitor Chinese submarine activity as it extends beyond the Pacific and into the Indian Ocean, where China has been steadily increasing its naval presence. The strategic vision is to connect India's developing network with the existing US-Japan fishhook system, creating a continuous chain of undersea awareness stretching from the Japanese home islands down through the first island chain across the South China Sea choke points and into the Indian Ocean. India is also pursuing closer real-time information sharing with the Japanese Navy, specifically focused on tracking Chinese submarine movements. If this integration succeeds, and that's a significant if, given the technical and political complexities of sharing some of the most sensitive intelligence on the planet, it would represent the most comprehensive undersea surveillance architecture ever constructed. But building the sensors is only half the challenge. The real bottleneck, and one that doesn't get nearly enough attention, is data fusion. Having a TRAPS node in the Bashi channel detect something, a Japanese hydrophone array in the Miyako Strait detect something else, and an Indian sensor near the Andaman Islands pick up a third contact, is only useful if all three detections can be correlated, analyzed, and acted upon in near real time. That requires compatible data formats, secure high-bandwidth communication links, shared classification algorithms, and, perhaps most difficult of all, the political trust to share raw acoustic intelligence across national boundaries. The latency between detection and decision is where wars are won or lost underwater. If it takes hours to fuse data from allied networks, a submarine moving at even modest speed can transit entirely through a choke point before anyone assembles a coherent picture. The operational concept that ties all of this together looks something like this. TRAPS nodes and allied hydrophone arrays provide the initial passive tripwire across key choke points. They don't reveal themselves, they just listen. When something trips the wire, a faint acoustic anomaly, a tonality that matches the signature library for a Yuan-class boat, the detection is flashed to a P-8A Poseidon, either already airborne on patrol or launched on alert. The P-8A races to the area and deploys a Mach sonobuoy field, actively pinging the corridor to localize the contact. Simultaneously, Shark UUVs, pre-staged nearby, are cued to sprint toward the datum and establish a persistent active track. If the contact is confirmed, Orca XL UUVs, or manned submarines positioned further out in the Philippine Sea, can be vectored in for closer monitoring or, in a conflict scenario, engagement. It's a layered, multi-domain kill chain. Passive to active, fixed to mobile, unmanned to manned. And it's designed so that no single component's failure collapses the entire system. If TRAPS misses the initial detection, maybe a Japanese array catches it. If the P-8A can't get on station in time, the shark is already in the water. If environmental restrictions prevent LFA from operating near the coast, MAC sonobuoys fill the gap. Redundancy isn't a luxury here. It's the entire philosophy. The challenges ahead are substantial. The Type 039C is not the end of China's submarine evolution. It's a waypoint. Every indication suggests that Beijing will continue refining its submarine designs, incorporating new quieting technologies, improved anechoic materials, and potentially more advanced AIP or even hybrid propulsion systems. The acoustic signatures that American and Allied analysts are cataloging today may be significantly different within 5 to 10 years. That means the counter-detection architecture can't be static. It needs continuous investment, regular upgrades, and, critically, agile procurement processes that can field new sensor capabilities faster than China can field new submarines. The Navy will need to establish rigorous performance benchmarks for every component of this system. What are the MAC sonobuoy detection rates in high clutter environments like the Luzon Strait? What's the average operational uptime of deployed TRAPS nodes before they need servicing? How quickly can data from a Japanese sensor array be ingested, processed, and acted upon by a US P-8A crew? These aren't abstract metrics. They're the difference between detecting a Type 039C in the Bashi Channel and watching it vanish into the Pacific. The funding implications are significant too. The traditional model of undersea warfare, expensive manned submarines hunting other expensive manned submarines, is giving way to a distributed model where large numbers of relatively affordable unmanned systems do the dangerous, monotonous work of searching, while manned platforms are reserved for decision-making and, if necessary, engagement. Shifting procurement dollars from legacy platforms toward TRAPS, Shark, Orca, and their successors isn't just a budgetary preference, it's a strategic imperative. A single adversary submarine that reaches the open Pacific undetected could hold an entire carrier strike group at risk. The cost-exchange ratio overwhelmingly favors the submarine, unless you've built a detection web that's dense enough, resilient enough, and smart enough to catch it before it gets there. What we're witnessing is a fundamental transformation in how nations contest the underwater domain. For decades, the advantage belonged to whoever could listen best. Now, as submarines like the Type 039C push the boundaries of acoustic stealth, the advantage is shifting toward whoever can build the most integrated, most distributed, and most persistent network of sensors, passive and active, fixed and mobile, manned and unmanned, national and allied. The ocean is not becoming transparent on its own. It has to be made transparent, deliberately and continuously, through technology, tactics, and trust between allies. The silent depths of the Pacific have never been louder with strategic consequence. Somewhere in those waters, a submarine with an angled sail is running quiet, testing whether the world's most powerful navy can adapt fast enough to find it. The answer to that question won't just determine who controls the choke points of the first island chain. It will shape the balance of military power across the entire Indo-Pacific for decades to come. And right now, that answer is still being written.